The morning sun blazed over Camp Lejeune, painting the parade ground in harsh gold and casting long, unforgiving shadows. Dust rose from the footsteps of Marines marching in formation, their boots echoing in near-perfect synchrony, a metronome of discipline. Staff Sergeant Blake Morgan leaned against the concrete edge near the motor pool, coffee in one hand, the other stuffed in his cargo pocket, lazily tossing sunflower seeds in the air and catching them with practiced ease. He wore his uniform loose, sleeves rolled halfway up, tie crooked, boots scuffed, the kind of Marine who lived more in his own world than in the strict lines of regulation. "Morning sunshine," he muttered to no one in particular, eyes scanning the parade ground like a predator looking for prey, or in this case, entertainment. That's when he saw her. She stepped out of a sleek black SUV that had somehow slipped past the usual gate inspections. No convoy, no announcement, just a single vehicle gliding across the asphalt like a shadow. She was striking, not in a flashy way, but in the kind that commanded attention without demanding it. Her uniform was flawless, navy blue, crisply pressed, yet devoid of any insignia or ribbons. Boots polished just enough to hint at discipline, hair pulled back in a simple bun that betrayed nothing, and eyes, piercing, calm, calculating. Blake's first instinct was to smirk. He had seen countless officers walk the parade grounds, all polished and stiff, desperate to be seen. This one was different, unnervingly so. He nudged the Marine next to him, Corporal Jenkins, and whispered, "Check her out. No rank, no ribbons, must be one of those admin types. Somebody's Aunt Maybe, here to sort paperwork." Jenkins rolled his eyes. "Yeah, or the new supply clerk." Blake snorted. "If supplies dress like that, I'm enlisting as a janitor tomorrow." As if on cue, Blake strode forward, voice loud enough to carry across the asphalt. "Hey, Lieutenant," or, what are we calling you? Lost your pins in the mail." A ripple of laughter ran through the small group of Marines nearby, echoing off the barracks walls. But the woman didn't react. She didn't pause, didn't flinch, didn't even glance his way. Her stride was slow but deliberate, unhurried, like a predator gliding silently across the savannah. Blake raised his voice, trying to provoke some reaction. "Or maybe you're undercover, secret agent posing as a base officer, right? Should I start calling you Bond?" Still nothing. The silence became heavier with each step she took toward the command building. Her presence seemed to push the morning heat away, leave the chirping birds silent, as though the base itself were holding its breath. Blake's smirk faltered. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone who didn't appear to fear him. Finally, she stopped just short of the building, turned her head slightly, and looked at him. Not with anger, not with curiosity, but with a gaze that pierced right through the layers of sarcasm and bravado he'd built around himself. Blake swallowed, caught off guard by the intensity. There was a strange weight in that look, a sense of authority that demanded recognition even without the metallic stars, bars, or chevrons that he had been trained to obey. Then she walked inside. Blake stood there, jaw slack, the unshakable confidence he wore like armor suddenly feeling flimsy. Around him, the Marines who had been snickering exchanged uncertain glances. The murmur of voices that usually accompanied the morning formations had dulled. Something about her unsettled them all. "Who is she?" Jenkins finally muttered. Blake shrugged, trying to sound casual. "No idea, probably some officer's aide, or a supply clerk with attitude." But even as he spoke, the tension lingered, thick and oppressive. By mid-morning, the rumor mill began turning. In the mess hall, Marines whispered in small, tight circles. In the armory, discussions halted mid-sentence when someone mentioned her name, or rather, the absence of her name or rank. "She's not in the records," one corporal said, eyes wide. "No clearance I can see, nothing." "Maybe she's one of those new experimental programs," another offered. "You know, the ones the Pentagon keeps secret. Cyber ops, intelligence, special projects." Blake rolled his eyes. "Yeah, right. Or maybe she's here to check if your boots are polished correctly. Even he didn't sound convincing. By the time the afternoon briefing rolled around, the entire battalion was buzzing. Blake sauntered in late, smirking as usual, ready to play his role of the irreverent Marine. But the moment he entered the training room, the air shifted. There she was standing at the front, hands clasped neatly behind her back. Alone, no aid, no introductions, no insignia, just her. Blake blinked, scanning the room. The battalion XO stood beside her, unusually stiff. The sergeant major wasn't barking. Even the company commanders looked uncomfortable, shuffling in their seats like children caught in the presence of someone formidable. He tried a joke half-heartedly. "Ma'am, you lost your way to admin." The woman's head tilted slightly. Her gaze met his again. And in that instant, Blake felt the room grow smaller, the walls pressing closer, the weight of unspoken authority pressing down on him. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," she said. Her voice was soft but carried an iron edge that made him straighten involuntarily. "Stay after the briefing." Every Marine around him turned to watch, their curiosity palpable. Blake's mind raced. Stay after, what does that even mean? He swallowed hard. For the first time in his career he felt small. As the briefing began, Blake tried to focus, but every word was drowned out by the hum of adrenaline in his veins. She didn't speak yet, only observed, her calmness absolute, her eyes sweeping over each Marine with meticulous precision. Even the XO seemed nervous, fidgeting under her scrutiny. Blake's thoughts wandered, trying to analyze why she unnerved him so completely. He had faced boot camps, live fire exercises, and field operations. He had been shot at, yelled at, and threatened, and yet this quiet, unassuming officer, with no visible rank, made him feel like a recruit lost on his first day. By the time the briefing ended, Blake's curiosity had transformed into a strange mix of fear, awe, and irritation. The other Marines left the room, whispers trailing behind them, but Blake remained frozen, uncertain of what to do. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," she repeated, voice calm, measured. "Now." He followed her into a narrow hallway, the echoes of their boots loud against the metal floor. She walked with precision, purpose in every step, but said nothing. Blake wanted to speak, to joke, to regain some shred of his usual bravado, but he found himself unable. Ma'am, what exactly is this about?" he finally asked. She stopped, turned her head slightly, and regarded him with that same penetrating gaze. Her lips curved in a near-invisible smile. "You'll see soon enough," she said. And then, almost silently, she added, "And you'll wish you'd paid attention the first time." Blake's pulse quickened. Something about those words, so calm, so deliberate, sent a shiver down his spine. The black SUV waited at the base gate. She walked toward it without hesitation. Blake followed, compelled by a force he couldn't name. The other Marines watched from a distance, whispers trailing in their wake. No one had ever seen her move like that, and no one dared ask where she was going or why. As the SUV's door closed behind her, Blake stood frozen, the words of 1,000 jokes dying on his lips. For the first time, he wondered. Had he just underestimated someone he shouldn't have? And somewhere deep in his gut, Blake felt the first real hint of fear and curiosity about the woman who didn't wear rank, yet somehow made an entire base feel like it was standing at attention. By noon, Camp Lejeune was abuzz with whispers, murmurs, and half-formed theories. Every corner, every hallway, every chow hall table seemed to hum with the mystery of the woman in navy blue. Marines leaned against lockers, arms crossed, leaning closer to catch snippets of conversation. Corporals whispered over cups of lukewarm coffee. Officers fidgeted in their offices, occasionally glancing at the parade ground as if expecting her to appear out of nowhere. "She's not listed anywhere," muttered Corporal Thompson, flipping through a binder of personnel assignments like a detective hunting for clues. "No rank, no clearance level, nothing. Maybe she's part of some top-secret Pentagon project." said Lance Corporal Rivera, voice low. "Cyber operations, intelligence, something classified." "Or a spy," Thompson added, eyes darting to the entrance. "Someone's testing the base from the inside." Blake Morgan sat at a corner table in the mess hall, trying to sip his coffee without looking too obvious. He had long since abandoned the idea of maintaining his usual swagger. Around him, the whispers grew louder. He could feel the weight of curiosity and tension pressing in from every side. He frowned. He wasn't a paranoid man. He had served in hot zones, faced live fire, survived months of grueling operations. But this uncertainty gnawed at him. Blake shook his head. "Come on, she's just some officer trying to scare the new Marines," he muttered to Jenkins. "Relax. No need to start imagining spy games." Jenkins wasn't convinced. "Yeah, but you saw her," he said quietly. "There's something different about her. Even the XO looks nervous." Blake waved it off. "XO's nervous. That's impossible. He's been here 15 years. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling. There was something unnatural about the way she carried herself. Not arrogance, not posturing, but pure authority, a kind that didn't need insignia to command respect. By the afternoon, the rumors had reached the upper echelons. Officers who usually ignored small talk found themselves glancing toward the command building every few minutes. Word spread that the mysterious officer had been escorted to a secure office with its own encrypted communications system, a level of security rarely afforded to anyone outside the top ranks. A few Marines claimed they had seen a rear admiral leave her office, wiping sweat from his brow, looking unusually tense. Blake laughed nervously. "Maybe she's just really good at paperwork," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. When the battalion briefing started, Blake found himself entering a room unlike any he had been in before. The lights were harsh, the whiteboards empty and the chairs neatly aligned, almost ceremonial in their arrangement. As he walked in, he froze. She was at the front of the room, alone, hands clasped neatly behind her back, calm, collected, commanding. Blake's initial instinct was to joke, to break the tension with humor, his usual weapon of choice. "Ma'am, did we forget to give you a chair? Or are you doing standing drills for, inspiration?" The Marines around him tensed. The XO fidgeted. The sergeant major's gaze sharpened like a blade. Even the company commanders seemed to shrink under her attention. Blake realized in that moment that something was different, something dangerously different. Her voice broke the silence, soft but precise. "Staff Sergeant Morgan, stay after the briefing." Blake's pulse quickened. "Stay after, what does that mean?" The briefing itself was brief, almost perfunctory. Orders were read, schedules outlined, missions rehearsed, but the real focus of attention wasn't on the words, it was on her. The way she stood, poised yet unassuming. The slight tilt of her head, assessing each Marine, reading them like an open book. Even Blake, usually irreverent and loud, found himself silent, caught in the gravity of her presence. He watched her as she moved around the room, speaking softly to the XO and Sergeant Major. Her words were few, but they carried weight. Each instruction was precise, each observation incisive. She didn't need to raise her voice. The room obeyed her without question. Blake tried to whisper to Jenkins, "What the hell is going on? Who even is she?" Jenkins shook his head. "Don't know, but I've never seen any officers, treat someone like that without rank. Something's off." As the Marines filed out after the briefing, Blake lingered, trying to mask his curiosity. He approached her hesitantly, unsure whether to salute, introduce himself, or apologize for his earlier mockery. "You called me after," he said cautiously. She turned her gaze toward him. For a moment her eyes seemed to pierce right through him, dissecting every layer of bravado, every carefully constructed mask. "Yes, you were loud during the parade this morning," she said, "and I need someone who speaks before thinking, someone who reacts without filtering every thought through rules and regulations. You fit that description." Blake blinked. "That's a compliment." "It's a fact," she said, stepping closer. "You'll need it where we're going next." Blake's confusion deepened. "Where?" "Hangar Bay 3600 hours tomorrow. Be on time. And don't bring anyone else." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her pace calm, deliberate, unbothered by the silence that fell over him. Blake's mind raced. Hangar Bay 3, alone, at 6 in the morning. What could possibly happen there that required me and only me? The whispers of the other Marines lingered in his mind as he walked back to the barracks. The rumor mill had been relentless all day. Speculations ranged from intelligence operations to secret cyber warfare drills, from high-ranking inspections to covert Pentagon assignments. No one could pin down who she was or why she commanded such respect. By the time he reached his quarters, Blake couldn't ignore the growing unease in his chest. He had faced mortars, ambushes, and hostile fire overseas. But this was a different kind of battlefield. A battle of knowledge, influence, and authority, one he didn't understand and couldn't predict. He tried to sleep that night, but his thoughts kept circling back to her. The way she walked, the calm in her gaze, the confidence that didn't rely on rank or ribbons. Every scenario he imagined ended the same way, with him looking small, powerless, and utterly unprepared. When he finally closed his eyes, a single thought haunted him. Who is she, really? And why did the entire base fall silent the moment she stepped inside? By morning, Blake had made a decision. No jokes, no sarcasm. Tomorrow he would be ready, or at least, as ready as a Marine could be when facing a mystery that defied every rule he had ever known. He didn't know it yet, but the moment she entered the hangar the next day, his life would change in ways he could never have imagined. Because the woman without rank wasn't just any officer. She was a force of nature, and Blake Morgan had just stepped into her orbit. The hallway outside the briefing room was empty now, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the soft echo of boots on polished concrete. Blake's pulse thumped in his chest like a drumline in a parade, loud, insistent, impossible to ignore. He had spent years training for combat, for life-and-death scenarios in foreign lands. Yet nothing had prepared him for the quiet, commanding presence of the woman, who had just ordered him to stay behind. He followed her, unsure if he should maintain his usual casual stride or snap to attention. Neither felt right. Her movements were smooth, almost predatory, yet there was no haste, just purpose. With each step, Blake's uncertainty grew. Finally, they reached a side office, one of those small rooms that usually held nothing more than filing cabinets and a desk. She didn't sit. She didn't gesture. She just stood, hands clasped neatly behind her back, regarding him like a chess master watching a pawn stumble across the board. "You like jokes, Staff Sergeant." Her voice was soft, controlled, but it carried a weight that made Blake straighten involuntarily. He opened his mouth, hesitated, and tried to answer. Well, I'm not interested in your apologies," she said, cutting him off mid-word. Blake blinked. He felt suddenly small, as though someone had shrunk the room around him. The walls pressed closer, and his usual bravado seemed to evaporate under her calm scrutiny. "You see a woman without rank," she continued, stepping closer, "and you assume she's beneath you." Blake's mouth went dry. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but no words came. He had joked about her, mocked her, laughed at the absence of insignia, and now he felt a wave of shame wash over him. "That's not," he started, trying to justify himself. "It's fine," she said, and for the first time Blake noticed a subtle softness in her gaze. But it was brief, fleeting, a single blink before the steel returned. "You're not the first to make that mistake. You won't be the last." She paused, and Blake noticed something he hadn't seen before, a faint scar tracing the line of her collarbone, subtle but undeniable. It was almost imperceptible, yet it spoke of a life lived in danger, of battles fought in silence, of experiences no Marine in this room could imagine. Blake swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I didn't mean." She held up a hand, halting him. No, you don't understand yet. You won't. Not until you see what comes next. Her gaze flicked to the side, toward the narrow window of the office. Have you ever been in a room with an Admiral, Staff Sergeant Morgan? Blake hesitated. Not directly, ma'am. Good, she nodded slightly, because you're about to be. Blake felt his pulse spike. He knew admirals commanded fleets, not training briefings. Admirals didn't salute junior staff sergeants unless protocol demanded it. And yet, there was something in her tone that made him realize this was no ordinary meeting. Ma'am, I don't understand, he said, voice tight. Why me? She stepped closer, so close he could see the sharp focus in her eyes. Because you speak before thinking, she said quietly. Because you react before considering politics, ego, or protocol. And because, despite your jokes, you care. You care more than you let anyone see. Blake blinked. He had never had anyone, look at him like that. Not a superior, not a drill instructor, not even his parents. Her gaze stripped him bare, revealing the instincts and impulses he had spent years hiding behind sarcasm and bravado. You're not here because of rank, she continued. You're here because I need perspective, unfiltered, honest, immediate. And you, Staff Sergeant, are the only Marine on this base I trust to deliver it without hesitation. Blake's mind spun. He had faced live fire, ambushes, and hostile territories, but never had he felt the weight of authority pressing down on him without a single word of command. This woman, no, this officer, was unlike anyone he had ever met. He tried to protest. Ma'am, I don't know if I. You'll do fine, she interrupted, voice calm, almost soothing. You have no choice anyway. Her calmness was unnerving. It carried the certainty of someone who had lived through situations far more dangerous than anything Blake had faced. And then, just as he thought he might find his voice, she spoke again. Report to Hangar Bay 3 at 600 tomorrow. Be alone, be ready. And don't make a mistake, Staff Sergeant, because the first mistake could be your last. Blake felt his stomach drop. He had seen combat zones, explosions, gunfire, and chaos, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the weight of her words. A single misstep, and she implied, could be catastrophic. Hangar Bay 3 tomorrow morning, he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Yes, she said simply, turning on her heel. She moved with the kind of grace that made him aware of every scuff of his boots on the floor. Be ready, and Staff Sergeant, don't be late. Before Blake could respond, she had disappeared down the hall. He stood there, frozen, mind racing. The quiet authority she wielded left him speechless. For the first time in his career, he felt powerless, unsure, and, most unsettling of all, curious beyond reason. He finally left the office, walking toward the barracks in a daze. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of what was to come had already begun to press down on him. The rumors, the whispers, the mystery, all of it now carried a personal weight. He had been summoned. He was now a participant in something he did not understand, something he could not prepare for. Back at the barracks, Blake's thoughts spun. He tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe she was some high-level inspector sent to evaluate the base. Maybe she was part of a secret Pentagon program. Maybe she wasn't even Navy. But every explanation fell short. The authority she exuded, the control she wielded without rank or recognition, defied every rule Blake had learned in boot camp, in combat, in life as a Marine. Hours later, sleep eluded him. He lay in his bunk, eyes staring at the ceiling, imagining scenarios. Hangar Bay 3 at dawn, the mysterious woman, what awaited him there. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the scar, about the way she had cut through his bravado like a knife. He realized reluctantly that she had changed something in him. His confidence, his humor, even his cynicism, all of it felt fragile, inadequate in her presence. By midnight, he had made a decision. No jokes tomorrow, no sarcasm, no bravado. Whatever she wanted him for, he would approach it seriously. And yet, beneath the fear, beneath the uncertainty, a spark of excitement flickered. Because Blake Morgan, irreverent, Loud, unshakable Blake Morgan had a gut feeling. Tomorrow he would witness something extraordinary, and whatever that was, it would change his life forever. He finally drifted into a restless sleep, dreams haunted by the echo of her words. "You'll understand when they salute." Blake awoke hours later with a start. The morning sun had not yet risen. Sweat clung to his brow. He dressed in silence, every movement careful, deliberate, as if this morning were a mission in itself. As he stepped onto the quiet parade ground, the air crisp with dawn, he noticed a strange stillness. The usual hum of early morning activity was muted. Even the birds seemed to wait. And in the distance, the black SUV sat silently at the edge of the gate, a silent herald of the unknown waiting for him at Hangar Bay 3. Blake's pulse quickened. He approached it cautiously. Because one thing was certain. He was about to step into a world he had never known, under the guidance of a woman whose rank no one could speak of, and whose authority no one dared question. The first step into Hangar Bay 3 would be more than a test. It would be the beginning of everything he hadn't expected. And for Blake Morgan, the irreverent Marine who thought he had seen it all, there was only one certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning arrived too quickly for Blake Morgan. He had barely slept, mind racing through every scenario he could imagine for Hangar Bay 3. Each one ended the same way, with confusion, awe, and the gnawing sense that nothing would prepare him for what he was about to see. By 5:50 hours, Blake was standing at the base of the hangar steps, boots planted firmly on the concrete, uniform neat, rifle slung across his chest. The morning air was cool, damp with the lingering mist that had settled over Camp Lejeune, but Blake barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the massive structure ahead, the immense steel doors looming like the entrance to a cathedral, each one pulsing with the promise of the unknown. She was already there. The woman in navy blue, no rank, no insignia, no explanation, waited at the hangar entrance. She stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind her back, scanning the grounds with that calm, piercing focus that had unnerved him yesterday. She looked almost statuesque, like she belonged to the dawn itself. Blake felt an involuntary shiver. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," she said, voice low but carrying over the empty tarmac. "Stay close, observe, listen." He nodded, words catching in his throat. The hangar doors groaned as they slowly parted, revealing a scene that made Blake's jaw tighten and pulse quicken. Inside, the cavernous space hummed with activity. Personnel moved like clockwork, Marines and Navy officers coordinating in near silence. Yet the focus of all eyes, and the tension in the air, was not on the machinery, the transport aircraft, or even the bright floodlights illuminating the massive interior. It was on her. Then, almost imperceptibly, Blake saw them. 3 Navy admirals entered the hangar, moving with the weight and authority that only 3-star officers commanded. Their presence alone could shift the dynamics of an entire base. Yet they didn't stride forward carelessly. Each step was deliberate, precise, measured. Their eyes scanned the room, taking in the operations, the personnel, and then they stopped. Right in front of her. Blake's mouth went dry. His pulse thundered in his ears. He had seen admirals in photographs, on television, in passing during formal ceremonies, but never in this context, never facing someone like her. The admirals stopped, and the world seemed to pause with them. Even the humming machinery and the distant roar of the transport aircraft faded to a distant murmur. Then, in unison, the 3 admirals executed a crisp, formal salute. Blake froze. Time seemed to stretch into a taut wire. His eyes widened as he tried to comprehend what he was witnessing. They weren't saluting out of courtesy. They weren't performing a ceremonial gesture. They were saluting her because they recognized authority, absolute, unquestioned authority. She accepted it with a calm nod, hands remaining behind her back, her posture unyielding. No words, no explanation, just acknowledgement. Blake felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Every joke he had made about her, every sarcastic comment, every scoff at the absence of rank. He felt it all collapse inside him. The tallest admiral spoke, his voice steady, commanding, but tinged with something Blake couldn't quite place, respect, perhaps awe. "Ma'am, the operation is greenlit. Your command is ready." "Your command," Blake whispered under his breath. "Yes," she replied without looking at him, her eyes sweeping the hangar like a general overseeing a battlefield. "My command." Blake's chest tightened. His mind struggled to process it. She was commanding 3 admirals. 3 men who, by any measure, outranked almost everyone on the base, including the battalion commanders. And yet, here they were, acknowledging her authority without hesitation. He swallowed hard. "Ma'am, what exactly is your position?" Her gaze finally landed on him, calm but intense. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," she said, her voice measured. "You asked about my rank yesterday." Blake nodded, unable to speak. His throat was dry, his usual bravado evaporated in the heat of the moment. She took a single step forward. "I do not wear my rank publicly, not because it does not exist, but because in certain operations, rank must remain invisible. The work I do requires it." Blake blinked. He had served alongside officers of every grade, and he had never encountered anything like this. She didn't just outrank anyone present, she transcended the usual hierarchies. One of the admirals stepped slightly aside, offering a subtle gesture that seemed almost ceremonial, yet Blake realized it was more than that. It was acknowledgement of her authority, deference without words. "She outranks everyone," Blake whispered to himself, voice low, reverent, incredulous. The woman's eyes locked onto his. For the briefest moment, the calm, controlled mask softened, just enough for Blake to catch a glimpse of something human behind the stoic exterior, a hint of challenge, of trust, of calculation. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," she said quietly, "you're here because you see the world differently. You speak without filtering. You react without hesitation. You will be needed today. Do not falter." Blake straightened. He had been a Marine long enough to know the weight of responsibility. He had faced life-or-death scenarios before, but never had he felt the gravity of this moment pressing down on him like this. He understood, in that instant, that he was stepping into a world governed not by the rules he knew, but by the authority of someone whose reach extended far beyond the base, beyond protocol, beyond rank. The 3 admirals had returned to their duties, but their eyes lingered on her, a silent acknowledgement of her unmatched power. Blake could feel the tension in the room like a living thing, pulsing, almost tangible. Every Marine, every officer, every technician in the hangar seemed aware of her presence, their actions calibrated to respect her authority. She glanced at Blake again. "Do not make this about rank, Staff Sergeant," she said softly. "This is about clarity, honesty, and survival. You will learn soon enough why it matters that I do not wear what most would recognize, and you will understand why the world salutes in silence and in recognition before any insignia is ever pinned." Blake's mind reeled. He had no idea what she meant, but he knew one thing with certainty. She was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. Not just a Marine or an officer, but a force, a storm contained in a calm exterior, and now he was part of whatever storm was about to be unleashed. The hangar doors opened wider, letting in a thin shaft of sunlight that cut across the polished floor like a spotlight. The woman stepped forward, motioning him to follow. Blake's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what awaited him, but he knew this. Nothing about this morning, this hangar, or this mysterious officer would ever be ordinary again. As he followed her toward the interior, a question burned in his mind, one that refused to be silenced. Who is she really, and what is she about to make me witness? The answer, he sensed, would change everything. The interior of Hangar Bay 3 felt impossibly vast, stretching far beyond what Blake had imagined. Overhead, steel beams crisscrossed the ceiling, supporting massive floodlights that bathed the space in harsh, almost theatrical light. Aircraft loomed like silent guardians along the sides of the hangar, their fuselages gleaming. Equipment hummed and clicked, men and women in uniform moving with precision, every action choreographed as if the hangar itself were a living organism. Blake followed her, boots echoing on the polished concrete. Despite the buzz of activity, a strange stillness clung to the air, a tension that made every muscle in his body taut. He had expected chaos, disorder, perhaps even the usual morning clamor, but what he saw was something far more controlled. Every movement, every glance, every sound seemed measured, orchestrated to respect one person, her. She stopped near the center of the hangar, a small platform rising slightly above the concrete floor. She gestured for him to step forward. Blake did so cautiously, feeling the weight of every eye in the hangar, every subtle movement of attention directed toward the woman who had already unmade every assumption he had about authority and rank. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," she said, her voice calm but commanding, "stand here." Blake did, standing stiffly as the hum of operations around him continued, like a background soundtrack to a moment that seemed suspended in time. She turned, scanning the hangar. For a long moment she said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Then she spoke again, softer this time but no less powerful. "You have been summoned here because the world is changing, and you, in your own way, have always seen things that others overlook. You react, you speak, you think beyond the surface. That is why you are here, and that is why you were chosen." Blake tried to process it. Chosen for what exactly, ma'am? His voice sounded small even to him. Her eyes locked onto his, steady and unwavering. "For truth, for clarity, for decisions that cannot wait for committees, politics, or hesitation. You will see the world as it truly is, Staff Sergeant. And in the moments to come, you will understand why rank is irrelevant to authority, why insignia does not always define power, and why those who wear no visible stars or bars often command the greatest respect." Blake's pulse quickened. He had faced death overseas, seen the chaos of combat, and yet the weight of her words, spoken calmly but deliberately, made his chest tighten. This was no training exercise. This was something far more significant. Before he could respond, she gestured behind her. 3 figures stepped forward, each moving with the precision and authority of admirals, yet their eyes remained fixed on her. Blake felt a pang of disbelief. He had seen the admirals salute her the previous day, but now, in this vast space, the scale of their acknowledgement hit him fully. They deferred silently, waiting for her instruction. "This is your team, Staff Sergeant," she said. "You will not outrank them by insignia, but you will operate under their respect because of your role. Observe carefully, speak honestly, act decisively. You are not here to follow blindly. You are here to think." Blake swallowed hard. He had never been told that by anyone in uniform. Not a drill instructor, not a commanding officer, not even the most decorated veteran he had ever served with. She paused, then motioned toward a large table set in the center of the hangar. Blueprints, satellite images, and digital schematics covered the surface. Blake leaned in, eyes scanning quickly, but immediately felt the weight of the complexity. This was beyond anything he had encountered. Intelligence reports, tactical maps, encrypted data streams, all converged in this space, but there was a clarity in the chaos, a pattern only she seemed to command. "Today's operation," she began, voice calm and deliberate, "is not just a matter of protocol or strategy. It is about precision, judgment, and timing. And it is about authority, knowing when to act, when to defer, and when to take responsibility." Blake's eyes widened. This was no ordinary mission briefing. This was a lesson in command, in judgment, in understanding the world beyond the rank and file, and he was being brought into the center of it. She moved to one of the schematics, tracing a line with her finger. "These are the critical points," she said. "They must be observed, assessed, and acted upon. Failure is not an option, not because failure is unacceptable in itself, but because hesitation and indecision are far more dangerous." Blake felt a chill run down his spine. She wasn't just talking about military operations. She was talking about life and death decisions, about clarity and authority, about understanding that sometimes the hierarchy of rank must bow to the hierarchy of insight. One of the admirals spoke up, a calm, measured voice. "Ma'am, the coordinates are verified. The units are in position. All that remains is your authorization." She nodded once sharply. Then her gaze found Blake. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "you will be my eyes and ears. You will provide honest assessments without hesitation. Your observations will inform decisions at the highest level, and when the time comes, you will act decisively. Do you understand?" Blake nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," she said, a faint smile breaking the stoic mask. "Remember this, rank is a tool, authority is a responsibility, power is earned, not worn. Today, you will see why the world salutes without waiting for insignia." As she stepped back, Blake felt the full weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had seen military operations before, but never had he been placed in a position where his words, his judgment, his presence would influence decisions at such a level. He felt both terrified and exhilarated. The three admirals exchanged glances, then stepped aside, leaving Blake and the woman alone with the schematics. For the first time, she spoke informally, though the authority in her voice remained. "Do not be intimidated by the uniforms, the ranks, or the titles," she said quietly. "They follow me because they recognize clarity and judgment. They recognize preparation and decisiveness. You will too, if you are willing to see clearly." Blake felt a surge of respect and awe. He had mocked her the day before, laughed at her lack of visible rank, and yet here he was, standing on the precipice of understanding why the highest-ranking officers deferred to her completely. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met, ma'am," he admitted, voice low. She looked at him, expression unreadable. "And that is precisely why you are here, Staff Sergeant. Pay attention, learn, act, and above all, do not doubt that what you see is real, even if it defies everything you have been taught." Blake nodded again, absorbing every word, every nuance, every unspoken lesson in authority, judgment, and command. He realized in that moment that he was not just participating in an operation. He was being inducted into a world where authority transcended rank, where respect was earned, and where the line between life and death could hinge on clarity and decisiveness alone. The hangar seemed to pulse around him, machinery humming, personnel moving, lights flashing. Yet Blake felt an almost spiritual stillness in the center, as if the entire space had been organized around the woman in navy blue. Finally, she turned to the admiral nearest her. "Prepare the units. Staff Sergeant Morgan, stay with me. Observe everything. Question nothing unless necessary. Today, you will see why the world salutes without waiting for stars, bars, or insignia." Blake took a deep breath. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, but alongside it came an adrenaline rush he had not felt in years. This was no drill. This was no training exercise. This was real, and he was about to see the power of authority unbound by rank. And as she moved toward the exit of the hangar, leading him into the unknown, Blake knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing in his life would ever be the same. Because the woman without rank had just shown him in action that true authority was far more than a title. It was a presence, a command, a force that demanded respect without question. And Blake Morgan, irreverent, sarcastic, fearless in battle, had just been given a front row seat to witness it firsthand. The first rays of dawn crept over Camp Lejeune, casting a pale gold glow across Hangar Bay 3. Blake Morgan's boots clicked against the concrete floor, echoing off the cavernous space. Every nerve in his body was alert, every instinct screaming at him that today was unlike any other. She was waiting, as always, calm, collected, and unnervingly focused. Blake felt a strange mix of awe and fear. She moved with a precision that made the entire hangar feel like a living organism responding to her presence. Even the massive transport aircraft and the equipment scattered around seemed smaller somehow, insignificant against her quiet authority. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," she said without looking at him, "today you will learn why rank is irrelevant to real command. Watch carefully, act decisively, and trust your instincts. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied, voice firm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. She nodded, her expression unreadable, and gestured toward the massive aircraft at the center of the hangar. It gleamed under the harsh hangar lights, engines humming softly as crews ran final checks. The mission was clear: a rapid insertion of elite forces into a hostile, high-stakes environment where split-second decisions would mean the difference between success and disaster. Blake's role was simple to state but terrifying in practice: observe, report, and act on her instructions. But as simple as it sounded, he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. One mistake could jeopardize everything. The first group of Marines boarded the aircraft, moving with the kind of disciplined efficiency Blake had come to expect, yet even they seemed almost reverent in her presence. She gave a few quiet instructions, gestures so subtle they were almost invisible, and the unit responded immediately. Blake realized that her authority didn't require explanation, it demanded action. Then she turned to him. "Stay close, observe everything, do not underestimate what you will see, and remember your judgment matters, your voice matters, even now it matters." Blake nodded, swallowing hard. His heart pounded. He had faced ambushes, gunfire, and chaos before, but nothing like this. Nothing had prepared him for witnessing authority executed so effortlessly, so completely, that even the most seasoned officers deferred to her instinctively. The aircraft engines roared to life, a deep, throaty growl that vibrated through the hangar floor. Blake could feel the raw power of the machines beneath him, the anticipation in the air thick enough to taste. She climbed aboard first, the embodiment of composure and control, followed by Blake and the rest of the observation team. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, Blake's mind raced. He had been briefed, yes, but the reality was far more intense. Below them, the base shrank into a patchwork of green and gray, the roads and buildings looking almost fragile from this height. Above them, the sky stretched endlessly, the horizon tinted with pale oranges and purples. Then she spoke, voice calm but insistent. "We are entering hostile airspace. Situational awareness is critical. Observe patterns, anticipate reactions, and remember, do not assume control unless instructed. Your role is to support my assessment." Blake's hands tightened around his notes, sweat prickling at the back of his neck. He realized he was not just witnessing authority, he was participating in it, even if only peripherally. Every word she spoke carried weight, and even her pauses were instructive. The aircraft descended toward the drop zone, engines whirring with a low, tense hum. Blake's eyes scanned the instruments, the terrain below, and the faces of the Marines who would soon be deployed. There was a choreography here, an almost invisible thread of coordination that tied everyone to her commands. And yet, it was subtle, so subtle that someone untrained or inattentive could have missed it entirely. "Prepare for insertion," she instructed quietly. "Remember, hesitation is deadly. Observe, anticipate, and report." The cargo ramp lowered, revealing a churning landscape below. The drop zone was tight, flanked by dense foliage and natural obstacles. Blake felt a shiver run through him. This wasn't a simulation, it was real. The Marines moved in formation, poised and ready, waiting for the signal. She gave it with a single-hand gesture, subtle yet unmistakable. In an instant, the team deployed, slipping into the environment like shadows, moving with deadly precision. Blake's eyes tracked every movement, noting patterns, potential hazards, and immediate threats. Then it happened. A sudden flare of movement in the tree line caught his eye, a small enemy scouting unit, almost imperceptible against the dense foliage. Blake's heart leapt, and for a moment he acted purely on instinct. "Ma'am," he called out, voice urgent, "enemy scouts 2 o'clock moving along the ridge." Her eyes locked on his, sharp and assessing. Without hesitation, she adjusted her command signals, redirecting the Marines on the ground to intercept. Her movements were fluid, precise, like a conductor directing an orchestra at the peak of a symphony. Blake felt his pulse skyrocket, not from fear but from awe. The enemy was neutralized before they could react fully, the operation continuing without pause. Blake realized, with a mix of relief and astonishment, that her authority was absolute, not through fear or intimidation, but through unmatched clarity, anticipation, and decisiveness. Minutes later, the insertion was complete. The mission objectives were secured, and the team regrouped at the designated rally point. Blake finally allowed himself to breathe, his mind reeling from the precision, control, and instinct he had just witnessed. He had read about leadership, studied chain-of-command protocols, and seen commanders in action, but nothing compared to the seamless authority she exercised without a single visible star, bar, or insignia. She turned to him, expression calm, almost serene. "You saw what hesitation can cost, Staff Sergeant. You saw what clarity can achieve. Remember this. Authority is not given, it is taken by those who are prepared, decisive, and trusted. Respect is earned, not displayed." Blake nodded, words failing him. His usual bravado felt irrelevant in the shadow of what he had witnessed. He realized, painfully and exhilaratingly, that he had been part of something far greater than himself, guided by someone whose command transcended rank, protocol, and expectation. As they returned to the aircraft for extraction, Blake's mind raced. He had seen operations executed with perfect precision, but never had he felt the tangible weight of authority so fully embodied. He understood, for the first time, why the Admirals had saluted her the day before. She did not need rank to command respect. She commanded it through competence, decisiveness, and presence. Back at the base, the hangar doors closed behind them. The morning sun had risen fully now, spilling light across the tarmac. Marines and officers moved around, but Blake felt removed from it all, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. She looked at him once, her gaze steady. "You have much to learn, Staff Sergeant. Today was just the beginning. Authority without clarity is meaningless. Leadership without judgment is dangerous. Remember this moment. Remember what you observed." Blake nodded, finally finding his voice. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for letting me see it." She didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't offer reassurance. She simply turned and walked toward the exit, her presence drawing respect and attention without a single spoken word. Blake followed, feeling the weight of everything he had witnessed settle in his chest. He knew with absolute certainty that life at Camp Lejeune, and his understanding of command and authority, would never be the same again. Because she had shown him something no insignia could ever convey, that true authority is earned, embodied, and recognized instinctively by those who understand it. And Blake Morgan, irreverent, sarcastic, and fearless, had just stepped into a world where rank meant nothing, presence meant everything, and the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. The extraction helicopter hovered low above the landing zone, rotors chopping the morning air into a rhythmic roar that reverberated through Blake Morgan's chest. Sweat ran cold along his spine, not from exertion but from the lingering tension of what they had just executed. The insertion had gone flawlessly, a testament to her precision and authority, but Blake could feel the undercurrent of danger still pulsing beneath the surface. She stood near the edge of the landing zone, calm as ever, eyes scanning the terrain like a predator assessing every possible threat. Blake followed, boots crunching over gravel and dirt, his rifle ready but feeling almost symbolic next to her commanding presence. The Marines they had inserted were now moving back to rendezvous, completing the mission's first phase. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," she said without turning to him, voice carrying over the helicopter noise, "this phase is critical. Observe closely. Anticipate. Act decisively when called upon. Hesitation can cost lives. Yes, ma'am, he replied, trying to steady his voice. But he knew deep down that this wasn't just another drill or standard operation. She had prepared them to execute flawlessly, yet Blake could feel the tension thickening like a storm cloud, ready to break. The three admirals were back in communication, coordinating air support and extraction routes. Yet even they deferred to her, their voices clipped with respect and efficiency. Blake had never seen such seamless command, a woman without insignia orchestrating a complex operation where every action, every second, mattered. Then it happened. A series of unexpected movements in the tree line caught Blake's eye. At first, it seemed like debris shifting in the wind, but the precision of the formations, the subtle patterns of motion, told him otherwise. Hostiles, more than the initial recon had indicated, were converging on the landing zone. "Ma'am," he called out, voice tense. Multiple hostiles approaching from the east and southeast, 20 meters apart, moving to intercept our extraction. Her eyes flicked toward him for a single heartbeat. No surprise, no panic, only focus. "Noted," she said quietly. Then, raising a hand, she signaled to the Marines on the ground. In an instant, they adjusted their positions, forming a defensive perimeter with movements so smooth it seemed preordained. Blake could hardly keep up, noting patterns, hazards, and the position of every Marine. It was a delicate dance. One misstep, one hesitation, and the operation could spiral into chaos. And yet she moved through it like water, fluid and unstoppable, issuing commands without raising her voice, each gesture precise and deliberate. The enemy advanced faster than expected, closing the distance. Blake could see the tension in the Marines' shoulders, the fleeting glances exchanged as adrenaline surged. He realized that despite her calm demeanor, the stakes were life and death, every second mattered. Then the critical moment came. A hostile combatant broke from cover, sprinting toward the extraction point, weapon raised. Blake's instincts screamed to fire, to act, but she stopped him with a single, subtle gesture, an almost imperceptible tilt of her head. "Wait," she said softly, voice carrying an unshakable authority that silenced the chaos around them. Blake froze, heart pounding. Wait. This man was a threat. Every fiber of his training screamed to neutralize him immediately. Yet her calm, deliberate command forced him to trust her judgment over his instincts. In that split second, she assessed the movement, recalculated positions, and then, without a word, signaled for a Marine sniper on the ridge. A single, precise shot rang out. The threat was neutralized before anyone on the ground could react. Blake exhaled sharply, the adrenaline crashing through him. He had just witnessed authority exercised at the highest level, not through rank, not through intimidation, but through anticipation, clarity, and decisiveness. "Staff Sergeant," she said quietly, eyes now meeting his, "this is why you observe, anticipate, and trust judgment. One misstep, one hesitation, and chaos reigns. Authority is not about giving orders. It's about ensuring the right action occurs at the right time." He nodded, awestruck. Words failed him. He realized that in his entire career, he had never truly understood command until this moment. Leadership was not about titles or insignia. It was about presence, foresight, and the ability to remain calm when every element around you teetered on the brink of disaster. But the danger was far from over. The enemy had not been fully neutralized. Blake could see more figures moving through the tree line, converging with calculated precision. "Prepare for engagement," she said quietly, almost conversationally, though the tone carried unyielding authority. "Positions are critical. Trust your instincts, but act only when necessary." Blake felt the tension spike. He adjusted his stance, rifle at the ready, eyes scanning for threats. He noticed small details others might have missed. The glint of a weapon, the subtle shift of a shadow, the rhythm of movement in the enemy ranks. She moved among the Marines with fluid grace, issuing commands with gestures so subtle they seemed almost invisible. Yet every Marine responded instantly, shifting positions, securing perimeters, and preparing for extraction without hesitation. Blake realized he was witnessing perfection, a level of command so complete that it seemed almost unreal. Then came the critical choice. A secondary hostile group attempted to flank the extraction point, a clear attempt to disrupt the mission. Blake instinctively stepped forward, ready to engage, but she placed a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. "Watch," she said, voice calm, eyes scanning the perimeter. In the next few seconds, she executed a series of commands that seemed impossible. Using hand signals, subtle shifts in stance, and a calm, authoritative presence, she coordinated the Marines to intercept the flank without anyone realizing the complexity of the maneuver. The enemy was contained, neutralized, and the extraction point remained secure, all without a single loud command, without shouting, without panic. Blake stood frozen, jaw tight, realizing he had just witnessed the unspoken power of authority. She didn't need rank. She didn't need insignia. She commanded respect, action, and results with a presence that made hesitation impossible. The helicopter descended, skimming just above the tree line, its rotors slicing the air. Marines boarded efficiently, guided by her subtle signals, and the extraction began. Blake followed, still processing the events around him. He realized that her power wasn't about fear. It was about clarity, confidence, and the ability to see the entire operation in a single sweep. As they lifted off, Blake finally found his voice. "Ma'am, how do you do it?" She glanced at him briefly, expression calm, almost inscrutable. "Experience, observation, anticipation, and trust. Trust in yourself, in your team, and in judgment. That is all authority is." Blake exhaled, mind racing. He had always believed leadership was about rank, about orders, about protocol. But she had just taught him, in the crucible of real danger, that true command transcends rank. It is earned through clarity, decisiveness, and presence. As the helicopter ascended, leaving the extraction zone behind, Blake looked down at the terrain below. The enemy had been neutralized, the mission completed, and yet he felt more alive, more aware, more humbled than ever before. Because he had seen the impossible, authority without rank, respect without titles, command without ego. And he knew in that moment that nothing in his life or his understanding of leadership would ever be the same. The helicopter touched down on the base just as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the tarmac. Blake Morgan's boots hit the ground with a hollow sound, his chest still hammering from the adrenaline of the mission. Around him, Marines disembarked, efficient, composed, but there was an unmistakable buzz in the air, a reverence that Blake hadn't experienced before. She stepped off the aircraft with the same calm, commanding presence that had defined her throughout the operation. Not a word, not a gesture unnecessary. Her movements were deliberate, precise, and somehow magnetic, drawing attention from every person in the vicinity. Blake followed, awestruck, struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Hours ago, he had been skeptical, irreverent, mocking the absence of visible rank. Now he understood. She didn't need rank. She was authority incarnate. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," she said quietly, voice cutting through the soft hum of helicopters and chatter of the returning team. "Today was a test. Not of the Marines, not of the mission, but of your perception. Of your ability to recognize authority, to follow without hesitation, and to act decisively when called upon." Blake swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I think I understand now." She turned to him, eyes sharp and piercing, yet softened by something almost human, approval. "Do you, truly?" I've never seen anything like it," Blake admitted. You don't need insignia, you don't need stars or bars. And yet everyone obeyed, respected, followed without question, even the Admirals." She nodded once, her expression unreadable. "That is the point. Authority is not given. It is recognized, earned, and demonstrated. Rank is a tool, not the measure of power. Leadership is not a title, it is presence, clarity, and decisiveness. Blake's mind raced back to the events of the morning. The enemy scouts neutralized before anyone could react, the flanking maneuver that she had executed silently, the extraction that had proceeded flawlessly under her direction. Every action had been calculated, precise, and effective. And every Marine, every officer, every admiral had deferred to her judgment instinctively. "Ma'am, who are you really?" Blake asked, voice low, reverent. Her gaze softened ever so slightly, and she allowed a faint smile. "I am someone who has learned that respect is earned, Staff Sergeant, that authority is felt, not seen. That presence carries more weight than any insignia ever could." Blake nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "That's why the Admirals saluted you the first time I saw it." "Yes," she said, "because they recognized authority where it mattered. They understood instinctively what rank alone cannot convey: competence, judgment, and presence." Blake's pulse slowed slightly, but the awe remained. He had faced combat zones, ambushes, and hostile territory, yet this lesson was unlike anything he had ever learned. It was raw, unfiltered, and profoundly humbling. The hangar doors behind them opened with a metallic groan, letting in the warm light of late morning. Marines and officers moved with quiet purpose, but Blake noticed something he hadn't before. Every eye turned toward her, every subtle gesture responded to her presence. Even without speaking, she commanded the room, and the weight of it was palpable. "You understand now," she said softly, "that leadership is not about who outranks whom. It is about clarity in chaos, decisiveness in action, and trust in your instincts. You have seen it today. Do not forget it." Blake nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I won't, ma'am, I can't." She glanced toward the horizon, the sun illuminating her profile, casting her in sharp contrast against the sky. For a moment, Blake saw something human there, a hint of exhaustion, a trace of emotion, but it was fleeting. She was still always the embodiment of calm authority, the eye in the storm. "Staff Sergeant," she said finally, her voice carrying a subtle gravity, "take this lesson with you. Remember what you witnessed. Respect is not demanded, it is recognized. Authority is not given, it is earned. And when the moment comes, act decisively, without hesitation." Blake nodded again, fully aware that he would carry this lesson for the rest of his life. Not just in the military, but beyond it. She had taught him that leadership was not a function of title, protocol, or rank. It was a living, breathing presence that could command respect and action without a single word. As the extraction helicopter lifted back into the sky, Blake turned to watch her walk across the tarmac, every step deliberate, purposeful, and unshakable. For the first time in his career, he understood the depth of her authority, the weight of her presence, and the power that lay in true command. Then, unexpectedly, she turned and gave him a subtle nod. Blake felt a surge of emotion, relief, pride, and an unspoken bond forged in the crucible of real experience. He realized that this nod was more than acknowledgement. It was recognition that he had seen, learned, and understood. Moments later, the three admirals arrived at the hangar, moving with their usual authority, yet their eyes immediately sought her out. In perfect unison they saluted, a gesture that Blake now understood fully. Not protocol, not ceremony. This was instinctive respect for someone whose authority transcended rank, whose judgment demanded obedience, and whose presence alone commanded absolute loyalty. Blake's heart thudded in his chest as he watched. He had mocked her the day before, joked about the absence of insignia, and underestimated her. Now he understood that her authority was absolute, earned, and undeniable. She accepted the salutes with the same calm composure, hands still clasped behind her back, posture perfect, gaze unwavering. It was a quiet, controlled acknowledgement that carried more weight than any words could convey. Blake felt a wave of understanding and humility wash over him. This was the culmination of everything he had witnessed over the past days: the mission, the precision, the calm in chaos, and the respect she commanded from the highest-ranking officers in the Navy. She turned to him one last time before walking away, voice soft but filled with quiet power. Staff Sergeant Morgan, remember this moment. Authority is not a badge, a star, or a title. Authority is presence, clarity, and decisiveness. Recognize it, respect it, and when the time comes, embody it yourself. Blake watched her disappear into the corridor leading away from the hangar, the sunlight catching the steel of her uniform, the quiet authority radiating from every movement. He stood there, breathless, transformed, not by the mission itself, but by what he had witnessed. A lesson in leadership and respect that transcended rank, protocol, and expectation. And as he turned to the returning Marines and officers, he understood something profound. Authority was not about being feared. It was about being seen, recognized, and trusted. For Blake Morgan, irreverent, sarcastic, and fearless, the lesson was clear. The woman who had no visible rank had taught him more about leadership, judgment, and command than any training exercise, battle, or officer ever could. And in that moment, he realized that true respect is earned, not worn. True authority is recognized, not displayed. The base buzzed around him, a mix of routine activity and quiet awe, but Blake felt removed from it all, standing on the edge of understanding something profound. The woman without rank, with the calm presence of a force of nature, had forever changed his perception of leadership, respect, and authority. And for the first time in his career, Blake Morgan knew that he had witnessed something rare, extraordinary, and utterly American. A lesson in power, presence, and leadership that could never be replicated, taught, or assigned. It had to be seen, felt, and recognized. As he finally turned to follow the returning team, Blake Morgan felt a new fire ignite inside him. A fire to lead, to act decisively, and to honor the lesson he had just learned. A fire fueled not by rank, medals, or protocol, but by presence, clarity, and the unwavering authority of someone who commanded respect simply by being. And in that moment, Blake knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing in his life, or in the military, would ever be the same again.